Welcome to part 2 of our core training video series, where I'm going to give you a bit more exercise ideas this time. Alright, so let's get into it. So part 1, we told you that there was several things you needed to do in order to effectively work your core as you were intending to. So number 1 is really learning how to move correctly. Without moving correctly, it's sort of pointless isolating abdominals, because they won't change any of the faulty patterns that you're injuring yourself in the first place. So by learning to move correctly, you're sort of already halfway there. To ensure that you can hold good stiffness at the right timing is where breathing is massive, and there's plenty of videos where on our channel that you can look up where we discuss that in more detail. Using sling exercises where you're combining upper body and lower body together is sort of really teaching the body how to move efficiently. Now, where problems are encountered is not necessarily through the weakness of the core, but usually the lack of mobility at other joints at the extremities. And this lack of mobility is what forces the body to cheat on itself. And usually you'll find it around these areas here. They're the most common ones, but not the only ones. So to effectively work the core, you really have to sort of see where your problem, say it's with bending. You need to have a simplified drill of how do I improve wherever my lack of mobility may be. If it's not a lack of mobility, it's a coordination or timing problem, and I need to simplify the drills to learn this timing to then eventually reintegrate it back into the movement that I'm struggling with. The use of isolated abdominal exercises won't change any of that, as we've just discussed. So the secret is to understand that you're always going to sacrifice your lumbar spine here, because it's going to be the one that's the last link in the chain. He's really is nowhere left to hand it off to. Everywhere up and below is sort of like, compromising on things because of stiffness at the thoracic from sitting too much, or maybe even poor training, maybe stiffness at the hips below, maybe problems at the feet. Any of those are sort of going to go towards the central point, which is around the pelvis and the lumbar spine, and it's going to be forced into cheating. So strength is not its most important thing. If you remember from part 1, it's really the timing and coordination. That's what the real key. So the only way to change it is within the pattern itself, but how do you regress it? So here's an example of, say, quite an advanced core drill where you're really needing good foot stability to begin with. You need good hip mobility in this lunge position. You're obviously going to need to have good lumbar stability, or you're going to overextend your back, but you're also going to need thoracic mobility because you need the arms overhead. So if I was doing this in a squat position, which is even harder, because I'd also need ankle mobility in that one. So this is a regression of the overhead squat, but make no mistake, this is very difficult for most people. Usually the lack of hip mobility and thoracic is the big problem here. So all I'd need to do for this is just remove one of these components, or two even. So in this case, I've reduced the need for foot stability by kneeling on the floor. So I've just given him an extra point of contact. Now it's a lot easier to balance, so he can focus on the area that he may be lacking. The hip mobility is still there, but it's not as great as it is here because there's no strength required. Alright, so I've just taken away the strength requirement in the legs and also improved his stability at that lower part. That now allows him to work on the thoracic region and greatly give himself a chance to learn how to breathe through this position. If I wanted to make that even harder, I maybe would put that dumbbell in the opposite hand here, which would create an unstable feeling, and a bit more of the sling would be involved in that case. This is like the transition phase of a Turkish get-up. Now, if that was still hard, I might just go to reflex. I might to remove all strength, remove the thoracic part by taking his arms overhead and putting them both by his side. And that'd be, say, in the stability lunge drill here, which I'll show you what that looks like if you've never seen that before. That's this drill here where I go into a kneeling position. I just try to get my foot in front of my other knee, so I'm like in an inline position. This is deceptively hard for someone who has a real problem in getting good stability through there and not letting the hips dominate the movement. When the hips dominate, you're going to fall over all the time. And you can see here I sort of do a reasonable job at that. All right, so that's an example of a reflex stability drill, that really training the core to maintain its stability without the hips trying to take over. All right, so if I go back to the other one, so I could go down again just to really, this is more of a mobility drill, but I could use this drill to teach me how to keep good flexibility through my hips, but not try to get it through my lumbar spine. Because a lot of people will make this look good, not from tilting their pelvis under, but from just arching their lower back. So we may use this drill as a way of teaching you to sort of get into this lunge spot without trying to arch your lower back. So that's a regression from that, because there's not even any reflex. There's no strength or reflex required. It's just purely the mobility, but we still bring into play that stability component. All right, so another example would be for, say, an overarm press. This would be a simple, sort of similar to the last one, but we're adding the overhead component again. So I could,
my glutes are engaged. So
basically I'm going to have to engage my glutes and my abdominals here before I go to push the barbell up. This is where the thoracic component comes into it, because I need to have extension to be able to push this overhead. So as I go to push it overhead, I've got to also make sure that I don't lower the bar too low, or I'm going to let my shoulder go too far forward and I'm going to have all sorts of trouble. All right, so when I start to push it overhead, you'll see that as I go overhead, I get a good scapular timing. I've got to have my core on the job. If I get lazy through here, I'm going to arch my back too much. All right, so I don't want that at all. I've got to make sure that I'm keeping that engaged, but it's a simplified version because I've removed all the complexity of the legs, so they're all being taken out of the picture, so I can just focus on the movement itself. All right, so and it would look like something like that. All right, so now I can sort of focus on these things without it being too much of a strength exercise. All right, so if I come back to here, and I'm going to show you a couple of other videos here of some examples of where it's done poorly, and then how we would actually go to improve, sort of what I'm looking for first, and why the core is breaking down, like what you're sort of looking for the reason behind it, and then we'll have a look at a couple of examples at the end of what we might do.
I'm going to show you firstly a cutting drill that we use quite a lot, which is for change of direction in sport. Now, this is Nathan showing here a couple of the good demonstrations of this cutting move. I'm showing you in this slow motion, by the way, so imagine this at much higher speed. But basically, in the first ones that he's showing here, this is good form where he's staying quite low and he's in good control of the movement and really exploding quite fast. Now what you're going to see is when he demonstrates this in poor form, see, he'll instantly go more upright, and see how the trunk falls out to the right right there. And this is where people would often blame this as a weak core. And if this was in sport, he would either fall over if he was playing football, trying to chase someone or evade someone. And this is where people say, oh, he's got a weak core, that's why he's falling over. But really, the core, in this case, even though it is possibly not doing what it should do, has no chance to, because of the poor way he's executed the movement. And that has nothing to do with his trunk. That has everything to do with his coordination of him being too upright to begin with, maybe a poor foot plant, maybe lack of hip mobility. That's why he has to go so high. There's so many other factors that were at play before he basically just broke down at his core. His core had to break down at this point, because there's no way that he was going to be able to, from being so upright, be able to absorb the contact. So he has to sort of sacrifice it in order to complete the movement. Otherwise, he doesn't go very far. So this is where an example of where people are mistakenly blaming weak abdominal muscles. And if we were to test him, we might find that he does quite well on a plank and all the isolation abdominal exercises, meaning that how can he be strong in one exercise and then can be completely weak in another? And it's not the muscles as such, it's basically the sequence of how they're used, especially when he's standing up. So if he has to overcome a problem at the ankle, if he's got an ankle restriction, it's going to change everything. If he's got a foot problem, it changes everything. If he's got a hip problem, it changes everything. So, basically his core is going to be sacrificed because of all these problems. All right, so that's an example of a change direction movement. Let's have a look at another one. Okay, so here's a second one. This is sort of really a very simple one. Again, where weak core is often blamed in back pain with someone bending over to pick something up, and therapist or someone's told them you've got a weak core, that's why you hurt your back, and maybe they have. But often in the case here, so if Andy's demonstrating picking up a ball, let's just imagine this is any sort of an object, could be something in the home or at work, and he's demonstrating some good form here, which is really a deadlift in real life, in gym exercises. So he's demonstrating to keep the ball close to him and use his hips to do all the movement. Now, if he demonstrates poor form, basically what he's done here is, if I just play this a bit further, if he goes to pick that up from there, he's very poor hip movement and all spinal movement. So basically his hips have forced his back to move. So it's where someone will say, oh, it's weak abs. I wouldn't care how strong your abs are, you're going to hurt your back if you do this anyway. And if he's doing this, you sort of ask, why is it? Is it a brain problem? Is it a hip problem? Maybe his hips just can't move there. Maybe he has a weakness in the glutes. It could be a number of those things, could be all of those things. But the simple fact is, to blame his abs for this, for moving like this, is really like no plank or something is going to change that. The lever of this ball is a 7 kilo ball, but when it's that far in front of you, it's probably more like 37 kilos. And all of that load is going straight into your lower back. Your abs have no chance of stopping that from happening because he's basically got no leverage on it. All right, so this is just sort of 101 deadlift training. So if I take him back to the first one, see the ball's really close to him, then we're maximising leverage here, and he's able to he's getting his hips more involved. And so it's nothing to do with weak abs at all. All right, weak abs will become a part of it, but they had no choice. All right, so let's have a look at another one. All right, another quick example of where we see people told they've got a weak core, or I get people coming to see me for help for a weak core, or cycling, where people rock a rep out too much on the saddle. Now, Andy here is demonstrating what that looks like. Now, there's several reasons that could be for this. Obviously, first thing is bike setup. If the seat's too high, you're going to rock around like that because your hips just can't get in the right position. Secondly, if you've got a seat too low, you're going to have a problem with the knee, and you're also going to have trouble if you've got the seat too far back. You're going to have trouble with the handlebars too low. So that's why you really need to have your bike fitted properly for you. In this case, it's a spin bike, so it's not a true bike, but just to give the idea of what I was talking about. Now, if Andy demonstrates what it looks like when you're not moving around too much, you can sort of see he's got a little bit of a shift, which he should have naturally, but it's not like what it was before, which was where you're sort of really moving a lot to the side. Now, the thing that you can say, let's say you have had your bike fitted really well and you're still doing it, what would be the thing you'd look at? Would you blame the core then? Well, maybe not. I would definitely be saying you're probably pedaling with too much resistance on your pedal. You'd like too low a cadence. So you can see here Andy's got too much resistance on there, and he's basically going to have to move around like that because he just can't generate any power. So you're basically core's sacrificing itself to try and help out to find the lost power. So when he's pedaling with the right gearing, and this is if he's in a time trial position, you can see like he's really efficient, and that's why you see in the Tour de France the cadence will be close to 110 or something, definitely over 100. You won't see them pedaling with cadence of 80, which is what we'll see with a lot of amateur cyclists, and they wonder why they're pedaling in squares more or less. So in a faster cadence, you're going to be able to pedal with a bit more of a pulling back efficiency. So one of the first things is where you can't blame the core, because the core has really had to sacrifice itself to try and find the power that you're trying to use because you've got too heavy a gear on there. All right, so that's an example of where core's mistakenly blamed in cycling. Let's have a look at one more. Okay, so what do we do for improving core strength? So if we're saying planks and stuff like that aren't really going to help it, what can you do instead? Well, if we go back to the video where we played before, where of Andy doing bad form, right? So there's some good form, and then he's doing this, and we're saying that okay, there's no real benefit to try and strengthen his core if he's just going to give it up from bending like that. How how do I improve the core? Because him repetitively doing that definitely has made it weaker. So how do I improve it? Well, I could use like a simple exercise that's very similar to what we were doing, and getting him to learn how to use his hips. So really just teaching him deadlifting technique really. But basically when I get him into the position where I want him, I might leave him there for a period of time and say, okay, now it could be 10, 15, 20 seconds, getting him to feel the hips pushing right back behind him. So firstly learning to get the hip hinge, then learning him to get that lumbar curvature and be able to hold it there by creating pressure through his abdominal from how he breathes. So I might get him, so to reinforce this stability, I might get him to hold that for maybe 15, 20 seconds as such, for having a hold maybe 5 seconds and doing that 3 or 4 times, and then getting him to come up out of it and relax, and then go back down into it and do it again and hold that for a period of time to learn how to engage that while everything else is being put in its right place. If I do that, I'm getting more out of this because it's so specific to the movement that he requires, and I'm really stopping him from overdoing that, getting more mobility in the areas I need it. So that's one way I might do for this particular one. And so we'll look at another. Okay, so earlier we looked at Andy trying to put something up on the top shelf, and he was not doing a very good job of it. So you can sort of see here that this is where he was sacrificing his lower back and all of his stability through his core, through his inner unit stabilizers there. They've just pretty much blown apart, and he's just crunching his lower back there because that's the only way he could get his arms up. So we said it's a thoracic dysfunction, so he's going to need some thoracic drills to help loosen that. But how do I train the core to not lose that in a similar action? Well, it's where I have to simplify the movement by sort of taking him to the floor and using a simple drill where we go to get him down and trying to get that arm above and keeping this tight and learning how to extend through here. So I might get him with quite a low load and then hold this above his head, and at this point learn how to create good stiffness through there, and basically getting him to do a few reps so that he learns how to breathe through it. So when he goes into there, right at this point is where he's going to sacrifice based on how he's done things in the past. So his lower back is ready to start crunching itself, and this is ready to give up. We're going to say, no, we want to feel like there's a bracing static strategy through there, and you have to try and get your extension through there and not here. All right, so definitely not through there. And this is a drill that you could use that will give him much more benefit than any type of plank or crunch or any basically abdominal isolation, because the abdominals just, it has to give it up. There's no two ways about it. It's the only way he can get his arm above his head until his brain has shown a better way. And see how this simplifies it by taking him to the floor. The simplification of it all, where this is harder with the pelvis being like that, we've got him in a much easier position for his entire body to learn it, right? So that's an example of how you might, we would classify this as a core exercise. So this is core that's very beneficial for his problem.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed those, and that gave you some idea on how many times the core can be mistakenly blamed for things. Remember, there's stacks of free reports on our website. You can go to them, and there's heaps of more online advanced stuff that really goes into specific details of things like shoulder pain, back pain, and knee pain. So you can grab a copy of those by just visiting our website. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'll see you on our next one.